Hi, I'm here to know if what I have done is right by asking my father to move out of my house. For context, sometime after I turned 12, my parents got a divorce because my father was cheating on my mom with a much younger woman. I will call her Sarah since I don't want to use her real name. I remember the day vividly when I came back home from school early. I had a half day and my mom had given me keys to her house so I could let myself in. We did have a babysitter, but she wasn't home yet, so I thought she was running late. I heard some noise from my parents' room and I got scared. I ran to get the phone to call 911 when I suddenly heard my dad's voice from upstairs. Curious, I went up to my parents' room to see my dad and this woman, Sarah, throwing their clothes back on. It was honestly scarring, and I gasped in shock audibly. They froze, seeing my face. I ran out of there immediately and locked myself in my room. I burst into tears as my dad kept pleading with me outside my door to open up so he could apologize. He kept telling me to not tell my mom anything. Before I could say anything or react, I heard my mom yelling downstairs. I opened the door to see my mom standing in the doorway looking at my dad angrily. Apparently, the babysitter had cancelled at the last minute, so my mom had rushed in from the office after taking a half day so I wouldn't be home alone. She had discovered Sarah trying to get into Dad's car outside and had put two and two together. My dad had driven them to the house thinking that nobody would be home at this time. When my mom noticed that I was home and had tears running down my face, she realized that I must have caught my dad and chewed my dad out. My dad kept apologizing and trying to justify how he didn't mean to hurt us. And despite all the yelling back and forth, my dad said he had to go and drop Sarah back at the office. My mom couldn't believe his words that in the middle of our fight, he was going to walk off and drop his mistress off. My mom told him that Sarah could take a cab, but my dad insisted, saying that he couldn't let her do that. My mom's eyes widened in shock upon hearing his words, and my dad left. This affair was very unexpected, as my mom and dad had been together for a very long time. His mistress was a woman he worked with who was 20 years younger than him. I don't know what she wanted out of him, but I guess it was so important that she had to destroy our family over it. Over the days, through several fights, my dad eventually confessed to my mom that Sarah was pregnant. This was devastating for my mom to hear, as my mom always had pregnancy-related issues and had miscarried twice after having me. He wanted Sarah to keep the child and had made up his mind about leaving us to start a family with him. This led to a nasty divorce between them, and my dad tried to get a hefty alimony from my mom. You see, my mom comes from an affluent family, but my dad doesn't. In the divorce, my dad wanted our house and wanted to kick my mom out, but because he had cheated, he lost the battle. Throughout all this, my mom tried her best to shield me from what my dad was doing to her, but I was old enough to know what was happening. It was a really difficult time for me. Throughout the divorce, my dad never once apologized to my mom or me for what he had put us through. My mom didn't want to separate me from my dad, so she allowed him weekend visitation. After the divorce happened, my father moved out and started living with Sarah. In the beginning, my dad tried his best to visit me during the weekends. He tried to be sweet and spend time with me, doing things that I loved, but as days passed, he started to smell of alcohol, and I hated the nauseating smell. I remember once when we went to get ice cream, my dad fell asleep on the bench outside the shop. I was so scared that something had happened to him that I called my mom immediately. When she arrived, she could smell the alcohol in him like I did, and realized quickly that he was too drunk to drive and had fallen asleep. She called Sarah from Dad's phone to come and pick him up and brought me back to the house. As you can imagine, my mom was royally pissed off at my dad for putting me through danger. My mom wanted me to have a good relationship with my father regardless of their divide, but for him to drink and drive had put not only him but me at risk. Later, when my dad was sober, He didn't even bother apologizing to my mom. He kept saying that he just wanted a nap, and that wasn't a crime. My mom warned him to not drink on the days he had to come and see me, and my dad agreed. After this incident, I was scared to go anywhere with my dad. Although my dad kept his promise for a while, he slipped back into his old habits very soon. His drinking changed him. I quickly realized that my dad, when he was drunk, and my dad, when he was sober, were two very different people. I remember one summer weekend, which was my 14th birthday. It was my dad's weekend. My mom asked if she could have me for the weekend as she wanted to take me and my friend to a music event in the city. She knew I loved a particular singer, and this singer was going to be performing at the event, hence she wanted to take me there as a birthday present. My dad refused, saying no way this was his weekend, so off to Dad's place we went. His mistress didn't even acknowledge my birthday and ignored my presence as usual. I had gotten used to it by now. In the afternoon, my dad suddenly informed me that he was taking me to the music event. I knew he did it to spite my mom, but I was beyond ecstatic as I was going to be watching my favorite singer perform live. My favorite singer was amazing, and I was so happy to be there until he was done and it was some other band's turn. I was not interested in any other artists, so I went to find my dad. I found him in the drinking area, which was already a bad sign. We had driven to the event and he seemed pretty drunk already with more than a few beers. I asked him nicely if we could go home now. It had been a long day and I was tired. I didn't want to hear any more music, but my dad vehemently refused, saying that he paid for tickets, so he was going to listen to every band who was going to play in the event. I told my dad that I was really tired and my legs hurt from standing for so long, and he got angry and yelled at me that if I did not want to be here anymore, I should go and wait in his car, and he threw his keys at me. I didn't argue because I knew how scary he was when he was drunk, and I was afraid of him then. So I went to the car. I was tired, upset and terrified. I was a 14-year-old who was sitting alone in a lonely car in a bad part of the city after midnight because Dad did not want to pay for parking in safer areas near the concert. I wanted to go home and I needed to use the bathroom, but there wasn't any kid-friendly place open anymore at that time. I was afraid of getting kidnapped if I went out alone without my dad. My phone was also dead, so I could call my mom for help. I sat there in the dark under the streetlights in Dad's car, scribbling on his post-it notes, waiting for him to come back. The night was getting chilly, but I didn't want to turn on his heat, otherwise my dad might scold me later. After 3 hours of sitting alone, scared and tired, and holding back the urge to pee, my dad finally came. He was so drunk that he could not walk properly, and he had two complete strangers with him, who were also very drunk. Dad said we were going to give them a ride home. I asked if it was okay for him to drive, and he yelled at me that of course it was okay for him to drive, and I was extremely stupid to even ask him that. I sat silently after that as we drove the strangers to their homes. They played loud music throughout the drive. After we dropped them off, we pulled into a gas station. I finally went to the bathroom, and then my dad bought me an iced tea, and then we talked. He told me that he was very disappointed in me that night. I looked at him surprised while sipping my iced tea, and my dad continued to say how he wanted to give me a fun night on my birthday, but all I had done was complain to him the whole night. He told me that I had been a bad girl and he was ashamed of how he acted, but he had decided to forgive me if I spent the rest of the remaining weekend acting nicely to him and his mistress. He continued to tell me how he didn't want to tell my mom any of this, as he didn't want her to punish me for my bad behavior that night. I was very naive back then and loved my dad. Hence, I genuinely thought that it was all my fault. I apologized and agreed to behave better so we didn't have to tell my mom about any of this, even though it was one of the worst nights of my young life back then. Now that I'm older, I've realized that he gaslighted me and threatened me to be silent because if Mom had found out that he put my life at risk by leaving me alone in the car and driving drunk with me, she would have made sure that he would never see me again. As time passed, my dad slowly stopped calling me or replying to me. He continued to pay child support, but other than that, he never initiated any contact with me unless it wasn't his birthday. I remember once calling him on his birthday, and Sarah picked up his call to tell me that I should stop nagging my father all the time with calls. She told me that my dad was spending time with his son, my stepbrother, these days, so I shouldn't interfere with their lives anymore. Hearing her say this was heartbreaking to me. I was still a child who was just missing my dad, but somehow I was blamed for trying to meddle in his life by his affair partner. After that day, I never called. I did hear from our relatives that Sarah and he went on to have another child, but I never stayed in touch with him throughout all this. I'm now 17 years old and recently lost my mother around a month ago in what could be the most horrible experience of my life. I spent a month and a half in a hospital taking care of her, only to lose her in the end. This is an experience I will never forget, and it has scarred me for the rest of my life since I had a very close relationship with my mom. I resented my dad because of the heartache he caused my mother, and I blamed him for her death. After Mom's funeral, I refused to talk to him initially, but my dad kept begging me to allow him back into my life. We were then informed by our Mom's lawyer that he had left all her assets to me, which meant that our family home now belonged to me. Because I'm 17, I was still not of legal age, so I cannot live on my own without the permission of my dad. This meant that Dad had to move back in with me along with his family. He seemed enthusiastic about the idea and readily agreed. My aunt decided to stay with me for the time being at the place until my dad could move in. Just 2 days after my mom's funeral, while I was still grieving, my dad informed me that he and Sarah had gotten engaged. He continued to tell me that he wanted to let me know first before sharing the news with everyone, as I was going to have a new mother. I was shocked beyond words, and for a minute or two I couldn't even comprehend what he was saying. My dad kept telling me how he was excited to move into Mom's place, where his children could finally live in a big house. I was confused and asked him why he was telling me all this when I was still grieving Mom. He told me that he was doing this for me so we could now be one big happy family. I burst into tears and cut his calls. I cried so much that I had puffy eyes the whole day, and I didn't understand why my dad was doing all this. Last week, they had an engagement party where they invited some of our relatives and friends. During the toast, Dad said something like, "I just can't wait to marry the perfect woman. I thank God for giving me the love of my life after all those years that I wasted with someone else." I walked out of the room after hearing what my father said. He basically considered his marriage to my late mother a waste of his time. It broke my heart, and I wanted to leave right away, but Dad's friend and Sarah followed me. Sarah started telling me that I shouldn't leave as people in the party might question my dad, but I told her I couldn't sit through this and I needed to go as I felt sick. Dad's friend tried to convince me to stay and say a few words about his engagement. I kept refusing and got tired of holding my anger in, so I just said, "I have no good words to say about my cheating father and his mistress. I need to go." Amanda got angry with me and called me an a-hole and told me that I needed to get over the past. I didn't even say anything and just left them behind. This weekend, my dad and his mistress got married in Vegas, and they posted photos all over social media, and that is how I found out. I couldn't believe how cruel my father was to get married just 1 month after my mom passed away. My dad called me yesterday telling me that they were on their way to move into the place. He asked me to not cry in front of his kids as he didn't want to make them feel sad or uncomfortable. Apparently, his stepkids meant more to him than me or my emotions. I watched my mom's house get filled with their things as the packers and movers delivered their stuff. My dad and Sarah walked through the house, with Sarah leaving commentaries about what needed to be changed in the house. She also took down pictures of my mom throughout the house and put them in the garage. I have recovered them and put them under my bed for the time being. Yesterday night we had our first dinner together, and it was extremely uncomfortable for me, to say the least. I couldn't believe that my life was such a mess, where I was stuck with my dad and his wife and their 2 kids who had toys strewn everywhere around the house. After dinner, Dad informed me that we needed to talk, and with a very serious face, Dad told me that the house had only 3 rooms, which meant that it couldn't accommodate all of us unless we were willing to compromise. He then told me that he and Sarah had given this a lot of thought and had decided that they didn't want their kids to share a room, as they wanted to give them their privacy. My brows furrowed in confusion, and I told my dad that other than the master bedroom and guest bedroom, the last remaining room belonged to me. This is when my dad informed me that he wanted me to move out of my room so his oldest son could have it. My eyes darted from my dad's face to Sarah in confusion as I struggled to understand what he was trying to imply. I asked him if he was serious, and Lisa interjected, replying that I was 17, so I didn't really need a room of my own while her 2 children were still growing and needed to have their own independence. My dad nodded in agreement and told me that as his oldest child, I needed to step up, and his kids, aka my new stepbrothers. I immediately started saying how ridiculous this was and yelling at him that this was extremely unfair. I told him I wasn't going to live out of my bedroom just because he wanted his children to have separate rooms, and went on to tell him that they could always share a room. Hearing this, Sarah yelled back that I was being selfish and I should learn to sacrifice for my family. I scoffed, hearing her, and told her that she was the selfish person who had come into our lives and ruined them. Sarah retorted that I should appreciate the fact that they had moved into this place to take care of me and not make this such a big deal. My dad told me angrily that I was not allowed to speak to Sarah this way if I wanted to continue living in this house. He reminded me that I was 17 and still a child under his care, so I needed to listen to him. He continued to tell me that I needed to follow their rules from now on, even if I didn't like them, starting with moving out of my room and crashing into the living room. He told me that I was old enough to take care of his stepkids, and he didn't want to waste his money on babysitters anymore. I started to protest again, but he firmly told me that I was welcome to run away and sleep on the footpath if I didn't follow his rules. I started to cry in anger and ran into my room, while he and Sarah continued to yell at how immature I was. I'm torn, Reddit. On one hand, I don't want to be the Grinch, but on the other, it's my home too. AITA if I put my foot down and refuse to play babysitter in my living room? Or should I suck it up and embrace the chaos? Help me out here, guys. Update 1. Thank you everyone for your support. I am grateful that a lot of you have left a positive comment on my post. For those of you telling me to leave my house and move in with my aunt, although I think that's a good idea, I don't know if my dad will allow me. I also don't want to give up my room or this house because it has so many memories of my mom. It's unfair that I would have to move out of a place where my mom would have wanted me to stay. It breaks my heart to know that my dad doesn't even care about how I feel. It's just been a month of losing my mom, and I'm now being asked to sleep on the couch. I'm probably going to cry myself to sleep tonight, and will face this in the morning with a fresh mindset. I'm too tired tonight to discuss this any further. Update 2. It's been a week since my last update. A lot has happened since then. For starters, after that night, I told my aunt everything about what happened between me and my dad. She was shocked to hear the way my dad and Sarah had behaved with me. I told her how low I was feeling and how I couldn't take it anymore. My aunt, concerned about my well-being, immediately pulled up to our house to confront them. My dad was shocked to see her show up at our doorstep. She sat everyone down in the living room and spoke with a gentle but firm tone, emphasizing the emotional turmoil I was experiencing after my mother's recent passing. The conversation went something like this. I understand these are challenging times for everyone, but I'm worried about Lisa, my name. Losing her mother and adjusting to this new family dynamic is a lot to handle. Can we talk about why you were making this transition even harder for her by threatening her? I'm her guardian and I make the rules. She needs to learn to adapt to live with us. Life doesn't stop just because her mother is dead and I can't coddle her forever. This is my decision for our family and I expect her to fall in line. Consider how quickly everything has happened and the impact it has had on her. You have moved into the house and are asking her to give up her room just because you are her guardian currently. What happens 1 year later when she's finally able to inherit this house?" My dad's eyes widened in shock upon hearing her words. "This is my house now, and I won't let her dictate how things will be in my own house. She's a child, and she needs to understand that this is how it's going to be." "She has been crying since yesterday after your conversation, and sadly, you won't see the pain you are causing your daughter. If you continue down this path, I will help her file a lawsuit against you for mentally torturing her at her own home." My dad, initially defensive, gradually realized the gravity of the situation as my aunt continued to threaten, telling him that she had more than enough money to come after him. He took a moment to absorb her words and began to see the situation from a different perspective. "Fine. She can keep her room, but I expect her to help out with babysitting my kids sometimes." "Absolutely not. If you leave my niece with your children, I will call CPS on you." Sarah and my dad looked at my aunt, wide-eyed, who went on to tell them that she was going to involve their entire family and reveal to everyone about what they had done to me. Dad and Sarah must have finally realized that they could not do anything anymore. My dad, reflecting on Aunt's words, recognized the need for a more compassionate approach. "You're right. I need to talk to her and find a way to make things more bearable. I won't ask her to give up her room or take care of her step-siblings." After the conversation, the tension in the house eased a bit, and my aunt's intervention played a crucial role in ensuring our living situation became more manageable. My aunt has promised me to call her if my dad or Sarah went back on their word. I am a bit sad that it took my aunt intervening in our lives for my dad to understand the implications of his actions. If my aunt hadn't come to help me out, I would probably have been sleeping in the living room by now. Update 3. It's been 2 months since my last update. After my aunt's intervention and a series of discussions, a more empathetic approach has been adopted in your new family dynamics slowly. Over time, the tension has eased and a new understanding has been developed. My dad and I have found common ground, fostering an environment where my feelings are considered. He is perhaps still afraid of my aunt and has not made my life any more difficult. Sarah, on the other hand, has refused to acknowledge me if my dad isn't around. She clearly resents me but doesn't cause trouble, so I will let her behavior slide. Gradually, some compromises have been made. I have joined therapy to deal with my grief, which has helped me to express myself better. This has made me realize the extent to which my dad has emotionally abused me over the years. Regardless of his supposed changed behavior over the 2 months, I can't wait to turn 18 so I can take back my house. I might not be cruel to them as they were to me, but I will be definitely asking them to move out so I can continue to live in my mom's house on my own, cherishing her memories. While challenges may still arise, I am committed to facing them and staying strong like my mom. My aunt and the rest of her family continue to show their support, and I know they will always be there for me. Stay tuned for more stories from our girl relationships.